we're going to look at rolling stock here. This is a game I had quite a bit of interest in when I first heard about it. And yeah, it doesn't look like there's a lot here. I've got another table set up with all the stocks and everything. It's XX relationship, which is basically all the companies in the game are based on companies from an XX game, and then these corporations have, their own shares and they hold companies. It's got a stock market of a different variety than XX has, but still an interesting one. And it's got this concept of you're going to be purchasing corporations, running them, and trying to improve your own stock portfolio, etc. Sounds like just my perfect kind of game, right? However, there were a couple of things that went against it. One was it was print and play, and I was kind of anti-print and play, although now there's versions available, and this may be one of them. I borrowed this game from a local gamer who, and I want to thank him for that, who's letting me take a look at it. We played it 3-player, and got the rules completely wrong and played something that wasn't really very enjoyable at all. But now I'm looking at it and seeing, this is how it's supposed to be played. The rules are a little weird, and we'll get to that in a bit. Some of this reminds me a great deal of the 2-player Railroad Barons that I have actually up here, because I thought it was an interesting enough game where you're running corporations that consist of companies that are sort of the rail companies, but you're not really developing the rail companies or anything like that. The development is in the collection of companies within a corporation. Let's look at the components and talk about it a little bit. First of all, you have player order cards. Hey, no biggie there. I'm using poker chips. They come with money. I don't think the money's been broken out ever. It's just unlaminated paper. And I'm not going to do that. But everything else is pretty much laminated in the game. These are stock valuation cards. Every corporation is going to have a stock value associated with it, obviously. But no two corporations can share the same stock value, which is a little weird. These are the actual corporations. It doesn't matter what they are. They don't have any differentiation. But I like to start out with old style graphics and then go to the 2038 kind of style things a little bit later. You have a bunch of companies which, as they go deeper and deeper into the deck, are going to be more and more valuable, but also more and more expensive. Basically, they have a cost, that's their face value. Then they have a range of prices that they can be bought and sold for, which gives you some capability to rate become a corporation. Basically, you can sell it for more than you paid for. And a series of other companies that they have a synergy with. And then up here they have an income, and this is pretty good. You pay $1 for it, and it gives you $1 income. But it's also, it's like the privates in an XX game. The really low value ones tend to give a better payout, but only on a per dollar basis. You have a foreign investor who's going to be sort of this extra player. Now the game holds up to 5 players. This 5-player position card is just here to, be there. I'm choosing to play in 4 because, well, it matches my table setup a little bit better. The other thing you have in it, you have some player aid cards here. I'll show you. This is an English version of it. Whatever this copy is came with, I presume, Swedish. I don't know, maybe German. I didn't really look too carefully. But laminated cards, yeah, that looks likely German. Laminated cards of with the turn order in it, and they're kind of nice and everything, but it seems to be the only thing that came in this copy that's not in English for some odd reason. And I mean, they were laminated, whereas all of these pieces are in English, and I don't understand the providence behind that. Anyway, the other thing that I wanted to show in terms of components is we have these little markers, and these are to mark the synergies. They're really just a mnemonic device, but you place them on the cards to indicate that there's going to be a greater value. Now, I'm going to break the convention that the rules suggest there, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. The rule books itself, rule books. So the game actually comes with 3 paper things. One is this learning the game, which is written more like a conventional rule book, like a cross between a conventional rule book and sort of a playthrough. And this was what got us into trouble, because unfortunately it tells you what you can do on any given turn for the first 2 turns and then the 3rd turn and thereon. And we kind of played through following the first 2 turns of that, but didn't really get to the 3rd turn one, and some misconceptions were derived from it, because there are things that you can't do and it kind of, or you can do and it kind of implies you can't. And so I'm going to stick to this, which is a really, really short rule book, but it's organized in a really strange fashion. You can see the components of the setup. Hey, great. A sequence of play. Sounds great so far. And that's it. Everything else is glossary of terms used in the sequence of play and various procedures that are called for in the sequence of play. It's a really, really parsimonious way to come up with the rules, but it's not necessarily the easiest to learn the game with. It does make it a very, very nice reference, though, because you want to know the sequence of play? Well, it's here in a little bit more detail than here, but pretty much this is good enough for you. And then everything else, you're just looking up glossary terms and procedures. However, you might not, it doesn't sink in as easily, perhaps, as it might. I was actually looking at this when it got discarded and we started doing this, and I found a couple of things where, trying to use that was a problem during the play, and then I found, hey, I'm playing it in a way that made the game completely unreasonable. So the setup, each player has $30. I'm using my standard 1s, 5s, 25s, and 100s. Probably won't get to 500s. There's not a lot of money in this game, I think. And the big thing in the setup is you set up all these cards so that the prices are in order, and stacking this deck. Some of the cards in that deck are taken out depending on the number of players. Well, in any number of players, some of the cards are taken out, but the amount taken out depend on the players. And that's important because the synergies relate to what's actually available. So you'll get a little bit of difference and a little bit of randomness, something some XX players may not like. The suggestions for the 6-player game, I think, are to throw in all of the cards. That way you would have really less randomness in the game. You still have randomness in terms of the order they show up, but you'll at least know that all the synergies will happen. Okay, let's look at the actions that can happen in a turn. So the first thing that happens is a corporation can issue a share. Now, nobody's got any corporations at the beginning of the game, so that's not going to happen. But what basically happens is if you have a corporation already started, you can pull one share out, you give it to the bank, you will pay the corporation from the bank treasury an amount of money equal to 1 space less. Okay, so let me explain how the stock market works. So you have a corporation, we'll say it's this one, and let's say somebody's got some shares of it, and it's going to have a value. Let's say it's worth $10 a share. All right. What's important is the space is going to the left and to the right of it, and it's really not that complicated. So when I say 1 space left, so if I was issuing a share, I would send this to the bank. The price would drop to $9 a share, and I would get $9 out of the bank pool into the corporate treasury. And like in XX, you got to keep the corporate treasury and your private treasuries apart, and you may have multiple corporations, so that all gets more complicated. But anyway, that's kind of the base mechanism that you're going to see with the stock values, is that they move up and down through here. Now, the one tricky thing is if the space they're supposed to move to has already been taken, they continue in the same direction to the next lowest or highest space. So for example, If I was at $9 a share and the 8 and 7 were gone and I wanted to release a share, I would be dropping to $6 a share and only getting that much money in my treasury, which is obviously not terribly ideal to drop that many price. Because if you control the company, the corporation, you're the person holding the most or at the largest number of shares than anybody has, which means that you're getting pretty heavily affected by the share price drop. Now note, there's also another thing. There's a zero price. If it drops down to here, you go bankrupt and your company disappears. All your shares are destroyed. It's available for restarting just because, hey, there's only 10 corporations. That gives enough for 2 corporations per player in a 5-player game. There's some danger to taking 2 corporations out, so it's pretty unlikely anybody's going to want 3, I think. We'll see. Okay. So that's the first thing that happens, and that's going to be done in the share price order of the corporations. Share price order is, of course, a term which is defined here, and this is how you read these rules. You look at something in the sequence of play, and then you look it up here. Now, for this, you'd have to look share price order. This is always descending, highest share value first. Okay. Now, in descending face value order, which is share price order, why is this said differently? I don't know. No, face value order is based on the face value of the companies. Aha. Okay, at that, if you have a company that's not associated with a corporation, you can form a corporation out of it. Now, this is one of the most complicated kind of things to figure out in the rules. So we look at this, form corporations. That's going to be a procedure. Separate the acting company from the other assets of the owning player. You select an unused stack of shares, one of these piles, and an available share price card that has the color for the IPO. So for example, red, you'd only be able to pick one of these share price values because red is not shown on these. So there's limitations based on, how valuable the corporation is, which share price value you can start at. Just like the share price zones in an XX game, except they move here, but they do in some of the XX games. Okay. Then you take the smallest possible number of shares from the stack so that the added share price matches or exceeds the face value of the company. Okay. So now any of the companies here are less than any of the values here. That's an important consideration, but it only applies when the red companies are out. And that's actually the heart of where we had a problem. And pays the difference between the added share price and the face value to the newly formed corporation. Now, this is not as complete as it should be. What they mean here is you've just taken a set of shares, which may be more than one. And with these corporations, it's only going to be one share, so you're not going to get any confusion there. But with later corporations, it may be more shares. You take the combined value of all the shares at their share price value that you've got and compare that to the face value of your company that you're throwing into it. Now you're going to pay the difference, and you pay that not to the bank, but to the corporate treasury. You're making up the additional value that you're creating by generating that share price. Okay, but now comes the neat part here. Then you take the same number of shares that you just released to yourself and give them to the bank, and the bank pays all that value into your corporation. Now, the way that the little Let's Play rulebook puts it, if you stop at the first place where you can do this, you're only allowed to buy one share. And I haven't looked at that because I don't want it to confuse me. This is actually pretty clear, except that it doesn't really specify. It's the aggregate of the share prices, of the prices of the shares that's compared to the value of the corporation. which could be a little clearer. Okay. So that's what happens when you form a corporation. You end up with a one or more shares of that corporation in your hand and a bunch of one or more shares equal to the amount you just took in the bank's hands, and then a bunch of money in the corporation, which is its initial capitalization. All right. Then, after all of the private companies that are not associated with a corporation have been given this choice, you can choose one of the following actions, and this is done in player order. Player order is going to be these cards here, which are random at first, but then are going to be based on who has the most money. Now, player order is defined as you keep going around, like a stock round in XX. And again, you have to look in the glossary to find that, and that's something that we seem to have gotten mistaken as well by using the playbook instead, or the Let's Play. The playbook actually is something completely different. I looked at that to try to understand, well, how do you make money in this game, given what I understood the rules to be. Okay, so the actions that you can take are buy a share. All right, so let's take this example again. If there's a share out here in the bank pool, and I'm going to have to reorder this, but if there's a share out here in the bank pool and we have our price $9. Okay, when you buy a share, you buy it at the next highest value, and it raises the stock value of the corporation. So here, if I wanted to buy this share, I would replace it with the $10 a share price, and I would pay $10 to the bank, because this is owned by the bank, in order to grab it. I can't buy anything directly from the corporate treasury. I could sell a share. Well, selling a share is the exact opposite, right? I have an extra share. I can't sell the presidents if nobody else has a share. I have an extra share. I sell it into the bank pool. I don't get the $10 a share. I get one less than that, $9 a share, and that sets the new price for that corporation. So every time you buy and sell, it affects the price. And obviously, if there are blanks, you drop down possibly more or rise more. Now, let's see. The next thing you can do is start an auction. Starting an auction, you pick one of these items for sale here, and you open bidding with the face value price or higher. And then in order, and I don't know what order the auction's conducted, I believe it's player, yeah, it's player order. Following the player that started the auction, you can raise the bid or leave the auction. And again, you keep going around until everybody passes, and you pay the bank the amount you bid, and you get one of these. And when you get one of these, it goes over in your personal holdings, not your corporate holdings. And one of these guys is flipped face up. But we won't do that because I had to stack the deck already. I don't want to reveal the information to myself or to you, but mainly to myself. But it's not available for purchase. It can't be put up for auction at that point. Anyway, once you've gone through buying, selling shares, buying companies from the bank to the limit that you want to do, and everybody passes, and there's no real reason not to trade in this. It's not like an XX game where you lose an opportunity by buying or selling something. The only reason to not trade is that you'll lose money playing the market, because there's a cost. You're always buying at the higher price. Of course, it sets the price at that, but you're not getting an advantage by buying. You're not getting an advantage by selling. Okay. At this point, you look at who has the most cash, and that person gets the first player card. And the next most cash gets the second player card, etc. Ties are broken in the prior order. And then we go to the foreign investor, and this is where he kind of does stuff. He looks at how much cash he has, and he'll buy the cheapest one of these cards that he can afford. And then he'll do that again and again, and each time they get replaced. But he can't buy the ones that have been tilted sideways because they're not available to him either. And new ones come out that are tilted sideways, but it doesn't really matter. You don't have to do that until he's done purchasing. Generally, it'll be hard for him to buy stuff. He has $4 to begin with. The only thing he can buy is this on the first round, and there's a good chance somebody will buy that because it's pretty cheap. Okay. After he's done, all of these are rotated so that they're available again for the next turn, really. And we go to the next step where corporations can buy companies from other corporations, from players, or from the foreign investor. Okay. The simplest case is if a player has a corporation, and this corporation is probably going to be near the player. I just haven't moved it. It'll probably be sitting over here. It has a private company associated with it. If I want to buy this corporation from, or this company from this corporation, I would have to have enough cash to meet one of the values in the range, and I pay it to the player involved. The player has to agree, which means this is usually done with the corporations you control from your own companies that you control. But it doesn't have to be. The second thing that can happen is two corporations can exchange a piece of property. In order for them to do that, one corporation has to pay the other corporation something in this range. Now, an important thing to keep in mind about both of these operations is that neither the company, nor when it's purchased, nor any of the money involved in the purchase can actually be used again during this particular segment of the play. So the money has to be marked. Now with discs, you can just kind of slide them under here or something, or put them on their edge, which might be dangerous. Generally, there's no real desire to be moving a company between corporations multiple times, or to be using the same money twice. Well, using the same money twice is attractive because, you know, I spend money from this company, from this corporation, to buy something from another corporation. And then that other corporation may want to buy something from me. Well, I can't use the money that just changed hands. And that may mean having to wait an extra full turn to get that money available for what I want to do. The foreign investor is a little different, but not much. The only restriction with him is he will only sell for the maximum price in the span. And the money goes to the foreign investor himself. So he'll buy other things with it. Okay. Then you're allowed to close companies. Now this is something that I feel maybe should be more restricted than it is. But as it stands, you can basically close any company by just removing it from the game. It either can be in your hand or it can be in your corporation's control, and you can just shut it down. Why is this such a big deal, and why do I think maybe there should be some further limitations on it? Because it significantly inhibits the desire to invest in other people's corporations. Presidency changes when you're the person holding the most shares of the stock, and when you become the person holding the most shares of the stock, which means it's like an XX game, but the difference is instead of 2 shares being necessary to have something dumped on you, 1 is sufficient. And also, it's trivial to turn something into an absolute piece of garbage. Which is to say, you have to leave one company with each corporation. But a corporation that has a lot of companies that could be valuable to someone else, even if that corporation's in trouble, that someone else may be willing to invest in it because it's making some money and not be too upset with the idea of eventually owning it. But all its resources could be disposed of in this step. So basically, you don't want to be a ride-along investor in this game unless you know that the corporation is too good for the person running it for them to possibly want to damage it. They don't need two corporations to to sell shares from. They don't need anything like that. They can destroy it all on their own with no problem. And that means it might be, the best thing they can do is to wreck the corporation and hand it to you in terms of player, the ordering of the players in terms of who's going to win, right? I don't know how to put that, but so that can be a problem. Now, the foreign investor will automatically close all corporations that aren't making money, or all companies that aren't making money. And that can happen because as we work our way through this deck, there's a cost of ownership to companies. At the beginning of the game, there's none. But as we go down here, all the red companies cost $1 to own. Well, eventually, that flips over to $16 for anything red, orange, yellow, or green. It's hard to make $16 off companies, off an individual company. I mean, it's not impossible, but in general, a lot of the obsolete companies are going to disappear as time goes on. Okay. Then you collect income. How's income determined? Well, for things that you hold or the private investor, the foreign investor holds, they just get this money. For things that are owned by a corporation, they get this money plus any synergy for the pair of items. So let's take a look here. This says KME, that's not here. BPM and MHE. Okay, let's say one corporation holds all of these. We'll take a look at what the synergy is here. BPM, I have. MHE, I have. And this has MHE as well. Okay, the important thing is the rules say always place to the left of this yellow line. I find that it's better to place to the right of this yellow line. And this is one place where the reason I find it easier to place to the right of the yellow line is because, one, to the right of the yellow line is more likely to have more space. So just a physical layout thing. But two, your less expensive, less valuable companies will have their synergies to the right of the yellow line, which means when I'm evaluating, say there's a cost of ownership of $1 on this. When I'm well, let's make it more than $1. Let's say it's $4. I think 3 is actually, but let's say it's $4. Well, when I'm evaluating the cost of ownership, I can look at this and see, okay, I'm making $4 by having this company. If these were over here, the way the rules suggest, let's see, AKE, BPM. Well, this looks like it's only making $2. And now, you could argue, well, what does that matter? I mean, I've got these here. I've got them on one side or the other. It doesn't really make much difference. Okay, the reason is because the higher colored things are always to the right of the line. And those are corporations or companies that you're likely to be keeping no matter what. If I'm looking at synergies between two red companies, it's not as interesting. But if I'm looking at synergies between, say, a red and an orange, I may be keeping the orange no matter what. So the value of the red company is really where the synergy lies when I'm making that determination of whether or not to close it. And I am probably confusing the shit out of you and hope somebody else is doing the rules on this because I'm approaching it from my way, which is not very good for people to learn games. Okay. So anyway, you collect the income that's listed, including any synergies, and that's put on top of the corporation. Now, again, any personal money from companies that you control go into your treasury. The foreign investor gets his money just the same way. He also gets a $5 bonus. Okay, now you have the option to pay dividends. And this is kind of a complex decision. So the amount of dividends is based on the cash you have sitting here and the maximum payout per share price, which is based on your share price, or per share, which is based on your share price value. So for example, if there were 2 shares out, as this represents, because that's what this says, and I can only pay $3 per share, if I have $6 in my treasury, I could pull up to that $6 out, and then it would be divided evenly between the shares. And you can't play with fractions here. Okay, that seems pretty simple, but here's the little tricky part. The corporation's value is now assessed, and it's going to be assessed by adding up all the private companies that it holds, their face values, and any cash on hand it has, comparing that to the number of shares that are out, and coming up with a valuation decision. So for example, here we have $7, no money here, 2 shares were issued. Well, it's going to go down 2 spaces. And we'll see if we can zoom in. There's kind of a 2 arrows thing there. Basically, it either goes down or up 1 or 2 spaces for each value you have. So with this $7 here, well, if I had $9 in my company treasury, let's give them 10. Okay, now I have $17 here. Well, $17 would only send me down to, by 1 space, to $8 a share. So if I pay out any dividends, I'm dropping the share value by 2 spaces instead of 1. The share value goes out, the dividends get paid out to the actual shares. So for example, in this case, let's say I decide to spend the $3 per share. I take $6 out of here, and then this guy gets $3, and $3 go over here to the bank who holds it, so they don't actually move. But other players could hold shares. There could be quite a few shares out, as we saw with some of the IPOs, and then you can also release shares as you go. The danger, though, is when you pay out your dividends, you're going to drop your share value, which is kind of similar to XX, right? Yeah. The difference in this game is you don't tend to be holding a lot of shares of your company unless you have nowhere else to park your money, because these in your corporation, because the companies tend to be really, really valuable. The caveat to that, though, is if somebody's going to try to take over your corporation, maybe you need to hold an extra share or something. But generally, you want to be cycling your money through these companies, from what I can see. Okay. Then, if there's no more unowned companies left, then this will be showing. And if there are no companies available for purchase, this flips over. If it's already flipped over, the game ends. So you only have 1 turn where you have to pay that $16 hit on everything below blue, I think. Anyway, that's the rules of the game. The actual play of it, well, obviously we're going to take a look at some of that, but let's get started.